All right, so welcome to the 20th annual Brattleboro Literary Festival. I'm Diana Whitney, one of the festival organizers and a Vermont poet and editor. Thank you so much for joining us today for Poetry and Conversation. Please use the chat to show some love for our readers, respond to their poems, and you can ask any questions you have via the Q&A button. If your question has already been submitted, you can click the thumbs up icon to upvote it. There will be links in the chat to purchase the books and to donate to the festival. And a special thank you to all of our sponsors who made this possible today. So I'm so excited to be here with Alexandria Hall and Shanta Lee Gander. We're gonna go alphabetically. And both poets will read, and then we will have a conversation, and we'd love you to engage in that afterwards. Shanta Lee Gander is a multidisciplinary artist who received the 2020 Arthur Williams Award for meritorious service to the arts. Her debut poetry collection, Ghetto Claustrophobia, Dreamin' of Mama While Trying to Speak Woman in Woke Tongues, won the Diode Editions Book Prize. And her second collection, Black Metamorphosis, is forthcoming. She holds an MFA in creative nonfiction and poetry from the Vermont College of Fine Arts, an MBA from the University of Hartford, and an undergraduate degree in women, gender, and sexuality from Trinity College. Gander is an accomplished photographer and prose writer, as well as a poet. Across all her creative work, she most appreciates surfacing the unseen. Ghetto Claustrophobia is an audacious debut, asserting the poet's power to redefine language and challenging our assumptions about the meaning of ghetto. The title poem announces the book's intention to resist categorization as it reinvents Black girlhood in America and journeys into unknown territory, both linguistic and personal. I'm the cartographer of how it's all supposed to be, Gander writes, asserting her place as a visionary of future empowerment. By unearthing memory that is personal, cultural, and historical, she enacts a search for meaning and creates a new language for a lost adolescence. Please join me in welcoming Shanta Lee Gander.
Thank you. Trying to speak woman, because I be bride, sometimes I be taken. My hunger produces lost friends, apartments, their hunger expands into labyrinths. I'm rebirthed by first lust and jealousy. Here I be xenophobe, estranged from adapting to their custom, their language. My body as wonderland, as kept, as what happens to me while I've gone missing. Me as their minotaur, as an exotic of their imagining. The children of lack and plenty have nothing on me. Ghetto claustrophobic, dreaming of husbands, of children. I'm somewhere asking answers of questions I already know. Asking a woman in Georgetown, explain the maps on my palms to me. A marriage, she said. 2 children, she said. But the house, never spoken. Along with their silent disclaimer, leaving here could change all of that. I'm somewhere asking a woman in Rhode Island, explain those cards. Maybe marriage, babies, maybe. But speak of houses never leaves her lips. Along with her silent disclaimer, a fool can do anything to change that. I build a map of how it all was supposed to be, using bone dust and braille. Marriages, babies, expand, become sprawling houses designed and forgotten. I'm somewhere asking a Zion Street witch, more Sears, more tarot, more I Ching. I'm the cartographer of how it's all supposed to be, using bone dust and braille, as if I know all these places better than all the they who explain it to me. I'm somewhere asking witches, more seers, more tarot, reading I Ching, trained in haunting psyches and embedding embers. They leave a trail of ash. I follow the trail as if I know better than all the they who tell it to me. They knew better, trained in the way hope goes missing like lines on palms. Trained in haunting psyches, they embed embers and leave a trail of ash. Somewhere I will appear. I'll keep asking about every place I've been. They know better. Trained in the way things go missing like lines on palms, all the faces of tarot, no knowing, no seeing can create what never was. Somewhere I will appear. I'll keep asking about every place I've been. Marriages, they'll say, babies, they'll sneer, houses will never be smoking. All the faces of tarot go missing like they're knowing and seeing. I'm someplace darning half-truths out of the answers to questions I already know. I'm going to read the title poem because for me, it was so important, given it caught me by surprise to choose this title for the book. And I wanted to show people how to read and receive and reclaim and redefine the term. Ghetto claustrophobia. Whether place, people, state of mind, you be locked in until you don't want to be. Noun, people. Ghetto claustrophobics, also ghetto claustrophobes, ghetto claustrophobians. 1. Any group of people, they evade capture, they evade description. 2. Identity, perceived or imagined. Noun, a place. Ghetto claustrophobia. 1. Fashioned for but not by. Think props, think characters. 2. Big, so big, expansive, endless. 3. Any place, the place with the matching riding mowers, that place where cliques of moms go by the same name. 4. Hotel room, apartment, house, dreamscape, cityscape, rulescape, selfscape. Could be another country, could be the human body as container, as shell, as place. From block to brick to burb to brownstone to any place, as in so many as in endless. 5. These places, real and imagined, just like the people, they evade capture. Adjective, state of mind, states of being, only an ailment if you want it to be. 1. Black girlhood in America. 2. Nightmares. 3. Stages of human development. I'm going to read some of this section out of the interlude. So off and on, I've belly danced and performed, and I think of the page almost like a stage space, and how you give the eye a rest and the spirit a rest while reading. So this is sort of what I consider the intermission of the book. The day God's thermostat broke, ghetto claustrophobic dream interlude. This never happened. It will shock you how much it never happened. Mad Men. The sleeper must awaken. Dune, 1984. Biggie wanted one more chance while Foxy Brown was hoping that someone would take her home tonight. And Spike Lee's Ice Cube on Rosie's breast in that movie imprinted like those lyrics. We all wish we had that ice cube, except our hot didn't look that cool. Heat turned bubblegum into lava that never let go of the bottom of our shoes. A reminder that God's thermostat was broke. The Walkman keeps skipping on that one song on that tape they took back to the store. They took that tape back to the store because what was a child doing listening to something that was vulgar? My music threatens mama's music. She's screaming from the front seat. I can hear it all the way up here. TLC drowns out Millie Jackson. We are captives of the back seat. Skin sticks to car seats that are somewhere between leather and plastic. The air conditioning in the car as broke as God's thermostat. McDonald's is our only hope, and pinching Maurice as we approach the Golden Arches is a promise we might get there. When God's thermostat is broken, find other ways to keep busy. Keep away from strangers. Keep away from the places where you don't belong. Something about the way heat brings about the more that would never cross your mind. Also, you're never supposed to talk to strangers, let alone pick them up in your car. Well, unless you know them. Even if you know them, you don't pick them up on a summer night. But isn't it safe if you have your friends in the car? Wade was walking along the side of the road. Wade had to stay off and on in that place where everyone knows there are secret tunnels and where they kept the patients. You know Wade. He's always on the corner. He'll freestyle a poem. He's always on the corner. He'll say something witty to draw you in those eyes. His eyes are a kind of brown-green color, not noticeable enough to make him handsome. It wasn't just his words that made you know where he was going again. You just knew looking into his eyes. The kind of eyes that made you peer in. The kind of eyes that spoke his crazy right into you as he talked. Speaking of crazy, sometimes boredom has a way about it. The kind of saunter like its twin, trouble. They both show up when it's hot. See, trudging through snow or trying not to fall on ice don't work well for these two. Trouble and boredom manifested in a dude the color of one of the early spring flowers, color of forsythia. No government name, but a one-word, two-syllable street name. He was straight out of the Newport Pleasures ads. A cat with a slick look, and what he bloomed we didn't want. But like forsythia, he appeared on time and within his season. He made us pay attention to the way day ate night, the way night ate children who had to succumb to the endless ride in the purple Cadillac. He made us pay attention to what happened when mamas felt the heat of the broken thermostat when their husbands are at work, the ghetto version of the bar hop. He taught us that people like houses are interchangeable. He taught us that like the endless tap in the bar hop, intoxicated cars stumble like the ones that had too many hunch punches. And when cars stumble in the heat, they hit telephone poles. Thank you.
Sorry, I was waiting for more. I was like, I want some more Gander claustrophobia. So here we are. I want to encourage everyone who's joined us to check out the links in the chat to buy the books. You can go to each of the authors' websites, or you can go to our link to our Brattleboro Literary Festival website where we have a bookstore. And they are just both extraordinary books. I'm holding Alexandria's book now. Alexandria Hall is a poet and a musician from Vermont. Her debut poetry collection, Field Music, was selected by Rosanna Warren as a winner of the National Poetry Series. She holds an MFA from New York University and is now a PhD student in literature and creative writing at the University of Southern California. Hall is the founder and editor-in-chief of Tele Magazine, an unusual online art and literary magazine focusing on communication, collaboration, and continuation across distance, language, and medium. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in Narrative, the Bennington Review, Hobart, and the Yale Review, among others. Rosanna Warren describes the poems in Field Music as sophisticated and down to earth, rising from a strong sense of place, rural Vermont, not postcard Green Mountains, but the working Vermont of raising goats and living in a trailer. I was entranced by this book, by the musicality of the poems, their startling syntax, the way they subvert the pastoral and conjure danger simmering in the fields and farms where weeds are ravenous and accident happens casually. Skilled at craft and playful with her lines, Hall explores the nature of home and the limitations of language. I can't wait to hear her read. Please welcome Alexandria Hall.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Shanta. And thanks everyone for being here. All right, I'll start with this poem called The Lake House. Ferrisburg keeps nothing but the smell of skunk and lilacs and the two lines of the headlights swimming over the dirt road like sturgeon under the water. I tried to dive in once, up on Satterley Road, where I wrecked the Chevy, threw it over like a breaching whale in a swell of broken glass, then landed belly up in the ditch, dirt holding the tire marks like a child holding her breath. Smells like skunk tonight, doesn't it? And lilacs. At night, when the neighbors' cows get loose and sashay around the yard, this trailer is just a dinghy slapped in their waves. Once the lilacs dragged me down that narrow dirt road to a lake house, the scent like thousands of purple fingers pulling and waving, always moving. But skunk smell, the animal either dead or scared, just hangs there, still. Pummeled by high beams and tires, it stays. At the lake house, I was strange, surrounded by nice things, trying on fancy clothes or posing nude before the Grand Bay windows. Things don't unrot, just become more rotten. Those windows made the lake between the hills into a mouth, opened wide to swallow them, to swallow the lilac too. Sometimes I get so small, but the sound I make is as big as a shrew caught in a mousetrap, thrashing around the cupboard like frantic knocking at the door. No one ever knocks at the door. Occasionally, though, the cows float by. My love. Turn a latex glove inside out. That's what it looks like. Every part of me aches its belligerence in your direction. Did I wake you? Show me your teeth. My love swims you, your shoulders like hard sails under the green curls. Doesn't sink, doesn't stink at all. Small powder around the moon. No, an eggshell. I was baking. Slight odor. Call it a fragrance. I fall it sometimes, sleeping. Didn't laugh that way. Why are you angry? Something hurts very badly. Look, I'm bleeding it. Hold your body up against mine. I'm a pool noodle with too many feelings. Look good in that dress, though. That thing that happened once happened again in a kitchen in Brooklyn, at a rooftop screaming, under the table in Middlebury. Happened to me differently. It depended me to you. I'm off the deep end, but I'm buoyant. Your hard plastic body cuts the waves. You are my mean hero. Give me some too. Dance silly for me, honey, baby, my love. I fall it sometimes, but I laugh well, walking backward out of myself. I contain myself needfully. Of all the things at Mary's house, I recall the look of the larkspur, overcome by the lavender. Sure, I see the rapture of Bernini's Saint Teresa, though the stone looks so cold. You have to be able to leave yourself before you can truly leave another. Last night I danced until I could have been slipped out of. But there's that I again, that I again. Morning is a despot. I comply with each humiliating demand. Before the renovation, birds flew down the chimney. My mother shrieked when they pierced the living room. This move is called the inflatable man. I call this one the trash compactor. How long is the average feeling of remorse? Rough estimate. Jay says there is no unseeing, no undoing, but I put it all in words until it withdraws completely. My neighbor who kept pigeons in a coop on the roof lost all 500 in the fire. A drone video shows the view from above. No sound, just the building heaving light. Contrition. My gullet is a sham, simpering sham, slivering too tight module. The body of cripes, the body of cripes. I thought I told you not to. She shook node on the flagpole. I saw some list under musk and tallow. Nothing left of the smut tunnel, fetid fetish, put stowage, rot toddler, pith pantry. I'm doing my breast. Fuck, I'm doing my breath. No, I'm doing my beast. Stop. You are the bees. Try harder. I'm waxfully backward between the tertival. Hacked be the tarantella. Please don't. In the hintering brack. Lunar, benign. Benign, moreover, and maladroit. Look what you've done. Look at your mouth in the sag patented sunk. I detest my skins, know my singe, know my sons. Look what you've done. Field music. Ringing out the wind chimes, the night leaves a hole for a spotlight, and my hands callous over the goats singing. Somebody killed my cat, not in the way Dad made the sheep click. You know, I've got half a mind to have you, hot as a salamander, foul as a skid steer. I ain't chicken. I saw Cat Baloo, the horse that fell through the ceiling. She was unbridled. I hope when I grow up, I marry a boy I know, so we both know what to listen for. The sound of falling tips the stirrup in the ear. Mom says ancient like ancient, and every time I hear eggshells or ankle shins, I stay up at night. The goats bleating in the barn bleeding into the goats. Wind jiggled like Dad's trailer, where I sit alone, waiting for the cockcrow to blear the fields. In the parking lot of the deli, pulling onions off a sub, my mother shrieks, "Crime a stitch." But I hear the four-wheeler's back tires 2 weeks ago tearing up the mud pit, thrown back like a spooked horse. Dad says he can sing like a Kawasaki. He says he's got some good ideas. I know how to shoot a gun. The .22 kicked my weak shoulder, but I lied and said it was fun. Just like I lied at my first confession, scared the priest would ask me to think harder or speak up. I never talk down. I never say shit. The gravel nibbles my toes. I know about sex. It's not a cardinal flying into the wrong window. The neighbor's puppies vacuum the gravel from the bitch. I don't like to call her that, but Jimmy does. We dig a hole under the uprooted hickory and wiggle our split ears into the culvert. The line of trees laid down after the ice storm slicked them. Dad hit Grandpa till the state troopers strode the kitchen, staining my sweater. Grandma says creak like crick, and I wait for the violins. If you keep kicking somebody, music will come out eventually. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you, Shanta and Alexandria. I want to start with a couple questions, but I definitely, for those of you in the audience, if you have some responses or questions for either poet, you can pop them in the Q&A. You can also do the chat if you're more familiar. Yeah, the last line, that is actually the last line about music is something that weaves through both of your books. And I know, Alexandria, that you're a musician. Shanta, you didn't read the poems that I'm thinking of, although there is the poem that alluded to Biggie and Foxy, but you have the poem about R. Kelly and Michael Jackson. So just wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about music and how it takes shape in your life, and how either a practice of music as a musician or listening to music helps you write, or how it appears in your poems.
Do you want to start with this one, Alexandria? Then I'll follow.
Sure. I mean, I guess I could speak of my own practice, but what first came to mind, and that's why I didn't jump in, I was just kind of looking at you on the screen, Shanta. I was thinking about what you said about the page as stage and this idea of intermission. And I was thinking, you know, I often think of like the page in terms of like spaces of silence or sound or whatever, but I was thinking about how that gives it both a spatial and kind of temporal thing, to think of it as like intermission in that way, to think of it in terms of like musical or performed event. But yeah, I guess for myself, I think a lot of my thinking through things or coming to understand or know things comes out of the music of it. And I think my first relationship to poetry was kind of a love of the sounds of it. So even if I didn't understand what someone was saying, it had a real meaning, a real profound meaning, in that it sounded important. And I think, you know, from that, a lot of complexity can be carried and brought forth, and a lot of surprising connections can be made. So I think for me, there's a logic to the music that's not just aesthetic, but kind of like a meaningful logic that's important to me in reading and writing.
Yeah, I would have to say, it's funny because I came up in the era of like, you know, the MTV debuting and making such an impact on the culture. And then there's also MTV raps and like, you know, this whole idea of internal rhyme and hip hop, along with, in my household, we listen to everything from country music, all, you know, so like love me some Dolly Parton, love Johnny Cash, all the way to like Motown, and I then of course like got deeper into other kinds of music. Like I love Gregorian chants, which I know is like really bizarre, but like I think is so dope. And like this, there's a way that, you know, I've been writing poetry for a while and called myself a poet before I deserved to call myself a poet, like as a teenager. And there's something about just the sound of words that I think over the years I've really thought about, is in terms of the sound of words, or how they move through the body, or how someone says something and how it feels in the body, or you say something and how it enwraps in the body. And to me, you know, words can be kind of like swallowing something. They go and they don't just bounce off of you, unlike that stupid adage, right? They go inside, and all these things happen, right? And there's something about like there's something about the way, for me, music has, you know, shaped, as someone who has danced and who loves movement, physical movement, and what words can do even in prose. And so yeah, it's definitely has been informative for me. And even if I wasn't conscious of it, the way that hip hop artists have like, it's almost like they, maybe in the future that will be considered some form of Shakespeare. That will be the new Shakespeare, because it's just sort of like, oh, look at these lyrics and look at what they do with it. Or like any good piece of music, what it does to the spirit. I think I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Yeah, such interesting responses. I was just reminded, I heard Natalie Diaz talking on Thursday, and she said something like language is the body. And Shanta, that kind of evokes what you were just saying. And yeah, I love that idea of the poet as performer and the page as a stage. We have some great questions from the audience. Leslie asks, do you have any writing warm-up exercises, ones that are not just write a poem that? So yeah, I know people talking about writing process is always really personal, but actually for the readers, it's really interesting. So whatever you want to share.
I think it can always be fruitful to respond to something, whether it's, you know, like another poem or a piece of art or something. But the first thing that kind of came to my mind was just kind of listening to something that is not necessarily something verbal or something that, or maybe in a language that you wouldn't understand or something, and kind of what do you hear, and like kind of taking that, not what do you hear descriptively, but what kind of language could you insert into it? Like, you know, I've always been interested in the words that people use to describe bird calls or something. So, you know, just like where does language insert itself in a way that's not the way that we normally use it, and kind of taking off with that and letting that kind of carry you. That's probably not my best idea for a warm up, but that's just the first one that came to mind.
Yeah, no, I'd have to piggyback off that. Like just, I think sometimes we take for granted a couple of things. I think we take for granted our noticing or observation, and we take for granted the weight of imagination. Like we forget how Proustian it could be to be somewhere or see something or encounter something, even in a basic conversation, and let that launch us into something else. And so thinking of ways, I would just say something as simple as a noticing journal. I'm someone also who started, I wasn't always a prose writer. I never imagined I'd be writing prose ever, actually, because my first languages were writing in my journal, which is very private, and poetry. And my poetry, I never imagined even sharing out loud or in public. And so the journaling for me is an act of noticing. And how do you bear witness? I think there's so much, especially now, to bear witness to. Even, I think it's a fascinating exercise. I write with a group of poets, and it's like, it's always so fascinating to me how a couple of them really do bear witness to what we call the mundane, or, you know, I don't think it has to always be this fantastical thing. It's like, sometimes there's very interesting shit right literally in your backyard, or that you could just do this thing. I would say start there, low hanging fruit, and piggybacking on what Alexandria said.
Great, I love that. And actually the words to describe bird calls reminds me of Louise Gluck, the wild iris. She spent, I think she talks about her periods of silences in between her books, which for me was always really comforting, someone who has silences, but she described reading gardening catalogs for months. And that kind of preceded the intense period of composition of that book, The Wild Iris, that won the Pulitzer Prize. So yeah, you can find like language and little bits and pieces of poetry anywhere. Okay, so we have a question from Mac. I was fascinated by the use of language in contrition, like off rhyme on the right word that never is spoken. Really amazing. I wonder if Alexandria would be willing to talk about her process for that poem.
Yeah, for that poem, I kind of set out with a mission. I think there's like two ways that I compose, and one is either something kind of like bubbles up and then like starts to gather moss around it and becomes a poem, or I kind of sit down and have a mission. And that one was to try to I mean, I think a big part of the book is about trying or wanting to communicate and often failing. And I thought, that basically what I wanted to do is do that in sort of nonsense, but with like an emotional urgency behind it. And I think my process was really just kind of, I mean, you can kind of hear echoes of like church, like Catholic mass stuff in there. I think there's these rhythms that we grow up with and that just kind of become a part of us. So when you get into a certain state and you're just letting the sound carry you, those are often the things that kind of will bubble up and will carry you along. So for that, my process was really just kind of like sit down, write some nonsense, and I think like the kind of patterns that came out of it were this sort of like, yeah, like the kind of contrition prayer type thing, but then also the kind of failure and trying to correct, and then failing again and trying to correct again. So I think it's like, in that, like, okay, I'm just gonna like free write in this sort of nonsense way that's strung together by a syntactic logic that makes sense, and just see what comes from it.
That was a great question and a great answer too. Okay, so we have a really interesting question about Vermont, which is actually one of my questions that I was going to ask around sense of place for both of you. So we'll ask, do either both of you identify as a, quote, Vermont poet? And if so, what does that mean to you? And I'm just going to add, I think this is a really interesting pairing. You're both debut authors, but also Shanta, you're someone who grew up elsewhere and now makes your home in Vermont, and Alexandria, right now you're living in Los Angeles, and you grew up in Vermont. So I'm really interested to hear what that means to you as quote unquote Vermont poet, or if that phrase doesn't even resonate, like how does Vermont and sense of place make itself felt through your poems?
That's an interesting question, because I don't, when people will say, either they'll use the word activist in relationship to my work, which I don't identify with, or Vermont, I'm like, no, that doesn't feel right either. That would be like calling me, and I grew up in Hartford, Connecticut, calling me a Hartford writer, poet. I don't identify with that. For me, I am a citizen of the world, and I hope to connect across borders and across different places. I will say Vermont, I've been here for about a decade. It's the place that has allowed me to really unzip as an artist. It's also not that all of my photography within this recent series was necessarily taken in Vermont. The landscape has colluded with me in such a way. But I do not consider myself a Vermont anything really. I just happen to be here, and I'm hoping, my words reach out beyond borders, just like I hope those beyond the borders of like state, lines would reach back in and like in whatever the way that means.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good answer to me. It's a difficult question. I feel like, I guess I wouldn't call myself that, but I'm generally kind of anxious about calling myself anything. But, I do see how it would be a useful way to refer to the poet who wrote field music. It's like, I mean, there's plenty of places in the book, but it's pretty heavily rooted in Vermont and upbringing in Vermont. But I'll often say like, I am a poet and musician from Vermont, because I do think that it's been an important thing that's kind of informed my work, but I'm not writing about Vermont as subject matter as much right now. So I just don't know how helpful it would be as like as a label.
Great.
And also I'm not there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wasn't sure what to expect when I was reading your books and thinking about that question. And yeah, I've been living and writing poetry in Vermont since like 1998. So I guess I do kind of claim that, I don't know, as an identity. But I think it's so fascinating what the stereotypes of Vermont and Vermont poetry are, starting with Frost and the pastoral and these sort of associations. And I guess something that I really appreciate about your book, Alexandria, is how that's just like, let's blown out of the water. And I see that especially in your photographs, Shanta, too. Like, it's not just, the orange leaves. Not that we can't enjoy the landscape, but okay, we have some other interesting questions. Where is the line, if there is one, between poetry and lyrics? I assume that's song lyrics. Yeah, and I don't know if either of you write songs or aspire to do so, but even if you don't, what do you think about that? Actually, I'm going to just note, Bob Dylan won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So, and a lot of people, like some people were fans and thought that was amazing, and other people were up in arms. So yeah, whatever your thoughts are.
I love the fact actually that Bob Dylan, so I'm not like a hardcore Bob Dylan fan. I did go see him in concert, but I don't feel like I had the right to go like see him in concert because I'm like, I don't know his songbook like that. But what I thought was so fascinating is that it did, like, it just, I think text, and then this is all I say because I'm not like Alexandria, I'm not a musician, but I think text comes in all sorts of different forms. I think, and so therefore it's like lyrics and poetry is lyrical, and therefore lyrics are also poetry. But I also would say beyond that, I'm someone that finds the visual poetic as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be in written form. But so I don't feel qualified really to answer that question. But I'm just saying I was on the side of, yes, this is interesting. Maybe we can see other forms of art in so many other ways beyond just the category that they're placed in.
Yeah, I agree with the bringing the visual into it too. I think just like speaking broadly, kind of opening the categories of what we see as poetry, or even, yeah, I think that can always be helpful. And but I would say, just in terms of personal process, in terms of my writing of lyrics versus my writing of poetry, I think of lyrics as working in kind of collaboration with the music. And so I think there's just so much pressure on the word in poetry that sometimes particularly poetic language does not make the best lyric, because it's like kind of like an unfair partnership where, it's like kind of taking the spotlight a little too much from the music. There's this kind of great thing that can happen when music itself can elevate a word that, or, a phrase that would otherwise, when something has to be sung to really communicate its affective power or whatever. But like, that's just one thought, because then again, like thinking about Bob Dylan or something, it's like, that is very poetic language. Or thinking about someone like Joanna Newsom, like there's people who do very beautiful musical things with very beautiful lyrical language. But I do think there is something about that special partnership between the two that can, so for myself, like sometimes a failed poem will contribute some of its language to a song, but typically it feels different. Like I wouldn't, sorry, I'm rambling on about this question, but I recently, I took a class at USC a while back that put poets in partnership with composers, like classical composers, which is something that I'm not, I don't know how to do. But it was really interesting to think about creating language to be set by someone else. And it felt like a different process having to consider that kind of thing.
I love that answer, and makes me want to take a failed poem and try to put it into song lyrics. Like what a great end for a poem that went to the junkyard. And I think about musicians like Joni Mitchell and some of her lyrics where if you read them, I mean, we do hear her voice always, like the human voice elevating it, but the lyrics themselves are often pretty stunning. I'm glad, Alexandria, you mentioned the composer, because I noticed with both of you, like just reading your bios and what your different pursuits are, that collaboration is something that is important to your work as artists. And I was interested in the magazine that you founded, Alexandria. So and then Shanta, I know that you collaborate across genres in your different, and I'm not sure exactly what projects you're each working on now that involve collaboration, but so maybe you could each kind of speak about communication and collaboration within different art forms.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that question too, for Shanta, I was interested in, because you're also a photographer and you write, also prose. I was just wondering how, so in addition to collaboration, how like within yourself and your process, how you see those creative pursuits, whether they collaborate in your own creative process, or if it's kind of separate things and separate ways of working at something.
Oh my God, that's so great. So I would say they all talk to each other in a lot of different ways. So for example, I also do journalism, and the cornerstones are being curious, asking questions, seeking truth. And how could I seek some version of truth in my photography or in the work that I write? Also bringing the air of curiosity to my work. In some cases, I do a lot of deep research with writing, whatever, and whether it's poems or whether it's piece of prose, and the digging and the excavating. Specifically with the photography, I did a series called The Dark Goddess, and that's still in play and on its way to another place. And I like to say each of the models, it was a collaboration with them. And instead of the way that we traditionally know of photography, where someone becomes the object and you wielding the camera, I kind of flipped it and said, okay, this is where collaborators and we are co-designers, even though this happens to be this idea that has been living with in me for 6 years. Co-conspirators, and also in some ways, I feel like the same way I approach my journalism, being a conduit for, and I always want to bring that spirit to the work itself. I feel like the work has rights, it has its own rights, even if I have some other vision for it, remembering to be the conduit and opening to. So yeah, sometimes it's very messy, and in terms of, there's no silo for, except for when I'm like, okay, I've got my journalism hat on, but still that same level of the curiosity and the excavating, even if I'm the one primarily listening. And actually, Alexandria, I had a similar question for you, because I saw in one of your interviews, you were talking about, I think it was like a few years ago, that you were working on some short stories and you were working on another poetry book. And I saw like it's a gorgeous literary magazine. So I was very curious about your process and how things, speaking in the spirit of collaboration, how and whether or not all those things, how they speak to each other for you as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I think in terms of the magazine, I was really interested in how we communicate and how we receive through art, through different media, and how much of the self is involved in receiving something and then kind of translating it and putting it back out there. And so, you know, it's also out of a love of play. I think sometimes writing can feel really solitary, and it can just be fun to, like to be co-conspirators with someone, or to be a playmate, you know, with somebody, to just be like, there's so much possibility. Let's just open ourselves to possibility. And then there's also a kind of urgency in the sense of wanting to communicate too. And it can also be a little tragic to think of the impossibility of really communicating. So those are all kind of the things that went into thinking up the idea of the magazine. And it's just been so magical to watch it unfold each issue. It's always surprising kind of where things go. And as far as an editor, it's not like I do a whole lot of editing, because it's about that possibility. It's about what will come through. So it's kind of, I mean, it's really fun to sit back and watch that happen. In terms of my own like different writing projects and stuff, I've been working on fiction lately, and it feels like a different muscle in a way for me. It's like much harder. It's not something that I feel naturally talented at or anything, and it's kind of fun to do that, you know, like when you start working something out and you're like, oh, I'm getting stronger, or like, oh, I said something that I meant to say, or that was funny, you know, like having those discoveries. And I think it's been a new way of trying to communicate something a little funny and a little absurd and a little sad, which is, I guess, what I'm just trying to do most of the time.
Thank you both so much. There's so many interesting threads through that about collaboration and working across genres. And if you're interested, if you go to the poet's websites, you can see the literary magazine that we're talking about, and you can get links to Shanta's photography as well, so you can get a little more sense. So what we decided we're going to do is each poet is going to conclude with a final poem to close off this event. And you can follow in the chat if you want to go further with their books. So again, Ghetto Claustrophobia by Shanta Lee Gander, and Field Music by Alexandria Hall, both prize-winning wonderful debuts. So Shanta will read, and then Alexandria, and then we'll say goodbye.
Surviving R. Kelly and Michael Jackson when they are your childhood's soundtrack. 1. Some days belong to Mahalia, but by Monday was Millie Jackson's day. By Friday, mamas didn't know it yet, losing one sense to gain another, the ability to insert themselves in between the breath and space of each lyric that left his lips. There was no doubt he was singing about them. He was singing to them. 2. He was saying to us, reminded us they didn't care about us. How could we question that? How could we break the big he became, giving original meaning to the blurred lines we were never going to question? The same way we could never question this truth. We never stopped looking for how to get back. We figured if we can make mortals into heroes and heroes into gods, then there'd be no question. We were all in the image of holy, right? 3, we can't question the holy created by our own hand, no more than we can question the magician who made age slip into numbers in and out of mouths of grown women as their daughters went missing. Lyrics became the psalms we repeated as we became accomplices to our bodies, becoming ignitions, cars, jeeps, or an endless hotel. He birthed relationships into existence, spoke babies into being. How do we question he who made us sanctified on the dance floor? 4, on the dance floor is where I would try to shuffle right, shuffle left, buck my hips. If I buck my hips hard enough, I become him. The beat and his voice take me back to the world premiere, the way he reinvented the thing we can't name. How could we ever find anything vulgar in that? 5, vulgar might not come close. It was proof turned pornography, Black girl interrupted by viewing parties, by all the women who said they would have taken her place. How many different ways did we all claim it wasn't him? 6, did they do it? That's not really the question. How did the music make us feel at our weddings, graduation, all those Saturday nights at the club? Didn't they remind us of flying with our feet on the ground? Did they do it? When our stories went missing, didn't we say they were the ones who handed them back to us? Where do I put the cassette tapes, the albums, Can we unpaint all the pain that's been on the walls in the rooms of our psyche? Can we remove all the wallpaper from our childhoods? Where is the sin in gods created and crafted by human hands? As gods go, they demand sacrifice. What does a sacrifice to a god look like? Our daughters, our sons, ourselves. Thank you.
That was really beautiful. I'm going to read this poem called People Fall All the Time, but I just wanted to say again, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Diana and Shanta and everyone who tuned in. People fall all the time. On the farm, there was a low music to it. The goats bleated, the cows bawled and bellowed, and below were the flats where the flames caught the neighbor boy's Carhartts, and he learned every note. He howled and lowed. Accident happens casually. A branch breaks and the body lands the wrong way. Snapping is easy. Find the beat. The body is what it was to be. Dad said, hay is for horses. Dad said, hey kiddo. Dad said, whoa now. He didn't buy a phone so he could lay low. He said manual labor. He said the fall is something you can take. He suffered a break in a lonely way. Low, hello, hi, hey, the words in the marrow, the sow and the marrow, what stays are the song and the crash of the tractor, the trash compactor, the machines full of love and the fields full of breaking, the fields where the light slips out. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. It's one of my very favorite poems in field music. Thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope you turn into some other events. We have poetry going on all day here at the Brattleboro Literary Festival, and follow these poets and their books, and take good care. Enjoy your Sunday.